Hello and welcome to the developer commentary for Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the sequel, or just the sequel for short. I'm Droter, one of the 4 authors of the hack, together with Chromister, Jon Groobz and Piranhaplant. In this video, we will talk about how the hack was designed and developed, and what issues we had to face. Although I'm going to do most of the talking, Chromister, Jon Groobz and Piranhaplant will talk about their contributions themselves. We will also hear from Joseph K, who was a beta tester for version 1.1, and he will tell us about his beta testing methods. I'm the guy that started the hack, and my 2 major roles were level design and custom spriting. I designed and built all the levels you can find in the hack, and most of the custom sprites too.
Hi, this is Chromister. What I mostly did was quality control or quality assurance. I have never played the original Zombies Ate My Neighbors, so as an outsider, my perspective going into it was more related to the hack itself rather than comparing it to the original. With this in mind, I reviewed and commented on level design, flow of gameplay, sprite work, and the overall feeling of the hack.
Hey, this is Piranhaplant here. The main thing that I did for this hack was create the level editor that was used to make all the levels, but I also did some other programming specifically for this hack, and I helped beta test it.
Hey guys, this is Jon Groobz, aka Stanley Decker. I helped make the original ZAM level editor and co-authored Oh No More Zombies Ate My Neighbors. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to say on this. I've never done a video game hack commentary before.
Keep in mind that this video will spoil a lot of the content of the hack. If you'd like to experience the game by yourself, stop this video now and head over to romhacking.net. Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the sequel, didn't come out of nowhere. This hack was inspired by Jon Groobz' Oh No, More Zombies Ate My Neighbors, Oh No for short, and it's the result of putting together the knowledge and past experience of all of its authors. For example, whenever I spent time designing levels, I used or improved upon design techniques that I've learned over the years. I spent a lot of time messing around with game editors for fun, especially the Super Mario World and Warcraft 3 editors. I've never managed to finish any of the projects I started for these games, but I still learned a lot about game design, like the do's and don'ts of level design, balancing the difficulty curve, or basic spriting. This experience was invaluable when working on this sequel.
I've been doing some ROM hacking for a few years now, but this is actually the first complete hack that I've taken part in. I started out with Super Mario World, but I was mostly just messing around then. I didn't really know what I was doing. I made a few levels and some other stuff. I thought about making a hack, but never got around to it. Eventually I moved on to New Super Mario Bros. For the DS, and here I actually made some pretty decent contributions to a level editor for that game. But again, I never really worked on a full hack. At some point I looked to see if anyone had done some ROM hacking for Zombies Ate My Neighbors, and to my surprise I saw that there was a level editor and a complete hack for the game. I played through the hack and it was really good, so I tried out the level editor to see what I could do. It certainly worked, but it was pretty lacking in some areas, and since Zombies was one of my favorite games, I wanted to see if I could do better. This was still really just for fun though. I never intended to make a full hack myself, just wanted to see if I could make a better level editor for the game. I started working on my editor, and once I got it in a working state, I put it out there, and that was about it. I never tried to make my own hack with it, and I didn't hear much about anybody else using it. At some point, I helped someone who was using it to make a French translation of the game, but nothing more.
I didn't know anything about level editors or ROM hacking before Droter engaged me with this project. However, I'm always analyzing games I like, from mechanics and level design to direction choices and execution. I've known Droter for years, and we have been discussing games for a long time. Helping out in this project was a fun and natural thing to do if I had one sometimes. Droter walked me through the basics of Zombies Ate My Neighbors, and I played some of it to at least get a glimpse of what the game was like, so I could provide insights and suggestions for the sequel.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the sequel, was actually born by chance. Back in January of 2017, I was looking for some old posts on a forum when I read about a ROMhack called "Oh no, more Zombies Ate My Neighbors." I was already familiar with Super Mario wall hacking, but for some reason I had never thought about playing hacks of other games. I downloaded Oh no and I couldn't stop playing it. I loved its great level designs and new features, and the hack even came with a level editor that I was very eager to try. Right after I finished the hack, I went ahead and tried to download the ZAM level editor, but unfortunately, the download link wasn't working anymore. I looked for the editor on Google and found it, and I also came across Sky Hurricane's ZAM hacking tutorials. I had everything I needed to start editing some levels. But there was a small problem. The level editor that Sky was using was very different from the one I had downloaded. Turns out there wasn't one but two ZAM level editors. The one I had, made by Jon Groobz, and the one Sky was using, made by Piranhaplant. Since I was going to follow Sky's tutorials, I downloaded Piranhaplant's editor and got to work. When I first started playing with Piranhaplant's editor, I wasn't really planning on making a full hack. I just wanted to mess around a little and have some fun. However, once I started editing levels, I just couldn't stop. The editor was so easy and convenient to use, and before I realized it, I already had built 2 levels, both of which were terrible, of course. You see, for me, when it comes to modding or ROM hacking, it doesn't matter how much or how little experience I have. At first, I always make tons of mistakes until I learn about the peculiarities of the game I'm working with. For this reason, I contacted Sky and asked him for advice, and I also played the original ZAM again to pay close attention to how the game works. What's its pace, how are the levels designed, what's the exact behavior of the enemies, which tilesets are more or less versatile, etc. I was already investing more time than I anticipated into the ZAM editor, and I had already asked someone for help. So at this point I thought that I might as well try to make a full hack. I scrapped those first 2 levels and started thinking about where I wanted to take the hack. I didn't want to start editing at random, then get stuck and abandon the project. The reason I abandoned so many of my older projects is because I hadn't planned ahead, and I didn't want to let that happen again. I came up with 2 possible directions for the hack. I liked both a lot, so I took quite a while to settle for one of them, and this ended up making an impact on the game, as you'll see. Both directions were really simple. The first direction was to take the monsters and the neighbors and switch their roles. The players would have to save the monsters from revenge-seeking neighbors. For the second direction, I would turn the hack into an extension of the original game. Think of the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 1 and 2. Both games are practically the same, but the second part is harder and has some new content. This hack would be like that. At first, I decided to lean towards the first direction, although I didn't really discard the second direction. I wrote down some ideas and drew some sketches about how the monsters and the victims would switch roles. For example, I would swap the Frankenstein's monster for a soldier with 2 bazookas on his back and turn the electricity into flying bazooka cells. The zombies would become cheerleaders that dig out of the ground with their pompons, and the vampires will turn into chefs that lift their aprons to shoot sausages at the player. As you can see, the hack was meant to be very silly and amusing. Of course, these changes were huge and would have required to redraw, recolor and rearrange almost all the sprites in the game. It was an immense workload, but I was motivated to go for it because I knew that such changes were possible. The authors of Oh No managed to make new victims and custom sprites for the hack, so changing up the existing sprites couldn't be much harder. In fact, I opened their hack with a hex editor to figure out how they made the new victims, but I gave up after spending a few afternoons without finding anything. I talked to Sky Hurricane and he gave me Jon Groobz's email so I could ask him how to change the sprites. But I didn't write to Jon just yet. I wanted to build a bunch of new levels first. That way, I could show them to Groobz and it'd be easier for him to take me seriously. However, building new levels presented me with a problem. I was still considering whether to commit to the first direction or change to the second one, and each direction required level designs that were at odds with each other. If I wanted to swap the role of the characters, I needed to make level layouts similar to the original layouts to let the players get used to the custom sprites. If I wanted to turn the hack into an extension of the original game, I needed fresh, creative and harder layouts. After thinking about it for a while, I decided to compromise and merge both kinds of designs. The levels would be similar to the originals, but harder. Of course, this decision had its pros and its cons. The major advantage was that I could keep all the levels I'd built regardless of the direction I ended up choosing. It would also be easier to keep the difficulty in check, and it would be an excellent exercise in creativity, because I would have to make the levels feel new while keeping the old level themes. However, designing like this meant that the veteran players would know what to expect in each level, and that would make the hack less exciting for them. I thought that this was a big issue, but I also thought that the pros outweighed the cons, so I went ahead with the idea. This is why most of the first 20 levels in the sequel feel so familiar. On the bright side, once I started creating levels again, I got hooked. I enjoyed every second I spent designing and building levels and thinking of new ideas. After I finished level 18, I finally contacted Jon Groobz and asked him for help, and I also contacted Piranhaplant to thank him for creating his level editor.
I do remember getting the email from this hack's author when he was still working on it. I get like 2 or 3 of those emails a year. Usually when people see how much work is involved in making Zombies Ate My Neighbor hack, they usually give up pretty quickly. But this one obviously was seen through to completion, and it's probably my favorite Zombies Ate My Neighbors hack that's been released. Probably even better than mine.
In the end, it turned out that Jon Groobz didn't have most of his notes on how to change sprites, and I was sure that I wouldn't be able to learn that on my own. So, I abandoned the idea of swapping the characters and went ahead with the idea of extending the original game. The plan of respriting the whole game was discarded, so now I was free to make more interesting levels. I already had the first 18 levels built, and although I would have preferred to use original ideas for those levels, it would have been a huge waste to discard 18 valid and perfectly functional designs. I updated some of my plans and ideas for future levels and got to work. Just as I was getting back into building new levels, I ran into a memory issue. I had placed too many enemies and items in the game, so the ROM ran out of space and got corrupted. Luckily, with some advice and recent backups, I was able to salvage everything without much effort. From this point forward, the development of the hack was pretty straightforward. A good chunk of the levels and most of the unique features in the sequel were created at this stage. I worked on the hack for 6 to 8 hours practically every day, either designing levels, drawing sprites, gathering information, or learning how to do new stuff. Thanks to this work schedule, I managed to complete a level every day and a half. The key for keeping this rhythm was organization. Even before I started making the first levels, I tried to think of interesting new features to add to the game, and I developed a level design philosophy to guide the level creation. I wrote down and selected the best level concepts I had, and chose in which levels I wanted to use them beforehand. If I came up with new or better concepts, I also wrote them down so I could use them at the right time. I imposed myself the rule of building all the levels in order. This way, I would avoid doing the most exciting parts first and then get bored and stop on the less interesting parts. I documented everything that I learned, and all this documentation allowed me to keep track of my progress, focus on my goals, and have technical information ready at hand. I kept in touch with Jon Groobz and Piranhaplant for the whole process, and they helped me with technical matters or implemented new features that I couldn't implement myself. For example, Jon Groobz and I exchanged some ideas and he explained to me how to modify sprites and graphics with Tile Layer Pro. He even sent me the palette files for the sprites, saving me from extracting them myself. Later, he offered me feedback on the custom sprites and palettes, and beta tested the hack before release. Piranhaplant also did many contributions to the sequel.
Eventually, I heard from Droter that he was working on a zombies hack using my editor. He showed me some of his levels, and they looked really cool, so I offered to test the hack for him. He also talked to me about some ideas that he had but didn't know how to implement. One of those was new palettes, so I quickly wrote up a tool that could generate palettes in between the ones that were already in the game, but that you could use permanently on a level. In exchange, he helped me out with the level editor by finding bugs, making suggestions, and even finished a feature that I had never gotten around to. Eventually, Droter asked me about making some more complex changes to the game. So I modified the code in the game to add some new features. One of those was snakeoids that drop a limited number of keys. This was needed so that the player couldn't farm infinite keys on the infinitely respawning snakeoids that were in some of the levels. It's really a pretty simple change, but it's kind of an interesting challenge to find exactly where in this massive blob of data that is the game is responsible for making the snakeoids drop keys, then modifying it to work in a different way. I also added a new bonus for killing a certain number of snakeoids. This is also pretty easy since we could just overwrite one of the bonuses that was in the game but was never used. The last big change I did was adding a new victim up item to the game. I thought this was a really great idea, so I wanted to add it, even though it was definitely more of a challenge than the two snakeoid changes. I eventually managed to get it all working, and I think it's a really great addition to the game that was definitely missing in the original.
Speaking of additions, let's take a look at a few of them and the reasons I had to add them. Dr. Tong's skull was included to make levels with werewolves less unfair. Although I like how tourist couples transform into werewolves sometimes, I've always thought that this mechanic is frustrating. When players enter a new level and see the palette fade, they don't know if they're a tourist or where they are, and this usually makes them rush through the level instead of enjoying it. So, I took a few of the developer sprites and used them to tell the players how many tourist couples are in the levels. Still, I needed to replace the developer sprites with new and fitting sprites, and that's how I came up with Dr. Tong's talking skull. The killer tomatoes were drawn so I could use the Kellyflock enemy on more levels. I thought it was a pity to have a perfectly functional enemy in the game just to relegate it to a joke in the last level. I changed its sprite to something that would fit in the game and place it on more levels. Also, since Dr. Tong was a talking skull now, I needed a new final boss, and Kellyflock's floating head fit the role perfectly. I turned him into the villain and wrote the plot of the hack taking into account Dr. Tong's skull and the new antagonist. The custom tileset palettes are there to add more variety to the tilesets and make them feel fresh. I decided to use custom palettes when I noticed that when a palette fades, it changes gradually, fading through intermediate palettes until it becomes the target palette. Some of those intermediate palettes look really good and I wanted to use one of them in level 9. I told Piranhaplant about this, and as he has explained, he wrote a tool that generates in between palettes. However, this tool cannot be used to make a completely custom palette, so I researched how palettes work and drew or adjusted all the other palettes manually. There are many changes and new features in this sequel, but it's not my intention to list them all in this video. Most changes are small but help rebalance or give a new spin to the game, like changing how many points the enemies and bonuses grant, or making tough enemies respawn. I made the first levels of the hack at the end of January of 2017. Level 18 was finished the 8th of April, and Piranhaplant did the first beta test. Level 36 was ready the 20th of May, and Piranhaplant did the second beta test. I met my self-imposed deadline and finished the last level the 1st of July, and Jon Groobz and Piranhaplant did the last beta test. Yet, the hack wouldn't be released until 2 months later, and that's because there was still a lot of work to do. Jon Groobz and Piranhaplant told me about all the issues they found while beta testing, and I got to work on them immediately. I refined some level layouts and adjusted the overall difficulty of the game. However, most of the remaining work came from finishing the custom palettes, drawing the final boss's sprite, and changing the title screen. Making the custom color palettes was a tedious task. Strangely enough, finding out how the palettes work wasn't the hard part. Picking and choosing colors for the new palettes wasn't too bad either. The hard part was to manually check every single byte in those palettes to learn what each byte does, and then do dozens of calculations to change the colors in the palette to my liking. Drawing Kellyflock's giant head was a big challenge because I have little sprite experience. I had to pull apart all the tiles in the final boss's sprite, see how they work, and then put them back together and replace them one by one, all while trying to imitate the art style of the original game. I already had done something similar for the killer tomato, but this sprite is 4 times bigger and much more complex. Luckily the credit sprites were much less painful to do, but then I had to edit the title screen. The title screen text, "Zombies ate my neighbors," it's drawn over a tile grid, and this grid is really adjusted to the text. I'm sure that there is a data table somewhere that would let me rearrange the title tiles, but at this point I was too burned out to find the table myself, and I didn't want to bother Jon Groobz or Piranhaplant again. Instead, I chose to just come up with a title that would fit in the available space. The working title for the hack was Zombies Ate My Neighbors, The Lost Levels. I wanted to keep this title, but there was no way to make it fit properly on the title screen. I also tried with Zombies Ate My Neighbors, Reimagined, and Zombies Ate My Neighbors 2, but both titles left too much empty space and looked terrible. In the end, I thought of Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the sequel. I knew it wasn't the best title because Zombies Ate My Neighbors already has a sequel and a spiritual successor. But the title made sense, it fit the screen, and it fit the plot, so I said screw it and went ahead with it. The hack was finally made public the 2nd of September of 2017, after almost 8 months of work. To my surprise, a lot of people started downloading the sequel. The hack reached over 1,000 downloads after a week, when I wasn't even expecting it to reach 100. What surprised me the most is that even gaming blogs and YouTubers started putting up articles and videos about the hack, and of course, Joseph K and Sky Hurricane were amongst the first people to play the sequel. The hack also received some criticisms that I was already expecting, like the title being inadequate or that a lot of the first levels were similar to the originals, but the overall reception was great. Even after release, the job wasn't done. I spent the following weeks fixing some issues that slipped through the cracks during the beta tests. Versions 1.0.1 and 1.0.2 fixed some smaller sprites, moved stuck enemies, adjusted the layout of some levels, and slightly reduced the difficulty of the game. However, a few more complex issues remained in the hack. I waited several months before I started developing version 1.1. After that break, I gathered all the feedback I could and got to work on fixing the remaining issues. I discarded and replaced bland levels, improved the custom sprites, fixed mistakes and sprites, and changed some of the designs. Two of the major changes in version 1.1 were swapping the tomato weapons for eggs and adding the victim map item. I've always thought that the tomatoes are a useless weapon, so I went ahead and changed them to make them worth to use. I increased their damage output and completely changed their appearance so players would notice that the weapon is different now. The victim app was Piranhaplant's work, who very kindly provided me with the necessary code on top of helping me with some other stuff. After a couple of on and off months of work, Joseph K and Piranhaplant tested the new version. Joseph himself will explain us how he performed the beta test.
Hello everyone, my name is Joseph K, and I was the beta tester of Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the sequel, version 1.1. As a beta tester, my primary objective was to see if everything in the game was doable. Could you get everywhere? Could you get stuck in places? And how Droter had dollars or banknotes in each of his levels, I had to check to find every single one of those to make sure they were all accessible. And of course, I also went and got through all the levels and found all the bonuses. What I tend to do when I beta test any Zombies Ate My Neighbors game is I tend to focus mainly on seeing if you can get stuck in places. Victims come later, and I tend to do playthroughs where I don't worry about getting the victims so much as making sure that you can complete the level and not get stuck. And that's what I do. And then afterwards, on subsequent playthroughs, I'll go through and try to rescue all 10 victims. But when I do it like that, I like to check to make sure I can get everywhere that you're intended to go and places you're not supposed to go. So what I will tend to do is pay attention to the borders of the stages, because the borders of the stages, if it's near water primarily or sometimes trampolines, you can jump off the screen, in which case you can't get back in. So that was what my goal was. And then, of course, since, like I mentioned, the banknotes or dollars that were in there, I had to make sure that all of those were accessible and that I could find all of them. And I would give my findings to Droter, and he would go from there. But yeah, that's it. I can't think of really anything else I need to say in that aspect. So, have a great day, and Droter, back to you.
After I got back the results from the beta tests, I fixed everything that Joseph and Piranhaplant found wrong, updated the title screen, and launched the new version, which is the last one as of today. This section is going to be about my game and level design guidelines. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail about every aspect of the hack or explain the reasoning behind every choice, because designing is a dynamic process and there are countless factors that go into every decision. What I'm going to do is provide a general overview of how I directed the hack and how I built the levels. You might find this section helpful if you are planning on making your own hack. The main aim for the hack was to provide a fun and enjoyable experience, regardless of the direction I would take it in. I knew I didn't want to make an overly difficult hack since I don't enjoy those myself. At the very beginning, I thought of making the hack enjoyable for new players, but I quickly discarded that idea. New players are not likely to try a hack without playing the original game first. Therefore, I did the logical thing and aimed the hack to experienced ZAM players. With these players in mind, I came up with the two directions that I've mentioned earlier, and I ended up choosing the second one. The final general direction for the sequel was as follows. The hack would be a continuation of the original game, but with increased difficulty, new content and unique level designs. The target audience will be experienced players, people who have completed Zombicide My Neighbors at least once. The difficulty curve will be adapted to those experienced players, and it will follow this pattern. The difficulty will increase gradually, but there will be sharp difficulty increases after levels 20 and 36. On top of that, the difficulty increase wouldn't be linear. The levels would be separated into sets of 4, since the game provides a password every 4 levels. On each set of 4 levels, the difficulty would increase in a linear fashion, but the first level of the next set would be easier than the last level of the previous set. This would give players breathing room and would allow me to keep increasing the average difficulty at the same time. The amount and variety of items in each level would be taken into account to prevent the players from getting stuck. Also, there would be enough items in each set of 4 levels to complete it using only its corresponding password. And finally, I would take into account how much information the players receive from the levels while playing. This way, I could adjust the designs to give clues and hints, or to make the levels flow better or in specific ways. These 5 points served as a frame in which to build the levels, but I also thought about which design practices would I follow to build good and fun levels. I developed a personal design philosophy, a guideline on how to actually make levels. This philosophy is separated into 2 categories: good practices and design traps to avoid. Good practices. Choosing a layout type for the level. This prevents me from building random layouts and helps me implementing the ideas I have for each level. Some examples of layouts are half-like layouts, linear layouts, branching layouts, circuits, labyrinths, arenas, hybrids, etc. Sticking to a theme for each level. This includes choosing a tileset or subtileset, which monsters will appear, and what kind of items will be found in the level. This gives the levels personality and makes them visually consistent. Dividing levels into recognizable areas. If each part of a level stands out on its own, it's easier for the players to remember better where have they been. This makes the levels easier to navigate and improves the flow of gameplay. Adapting the layout to the enemies. Each enemy behaves in a particular way, and the level layout must allow the monsters to be efficient. This helps the enemies fit in the level and justifies their presence. Giving purpose to everything built. Space is limited and therefore very variable, so each tiny part of a level ought to serve a purpose. It might hide a secret, hold an item or a neighbor, give information, set up a trap, etc. This guarantees that the available space is well used and rewards players for exploring. Designing for the player. Unless I'm trying to achieve a specific effect, levels should always give choices to the player, like providing different paths to explore or giving the option of opening up their own path with the bazooka. This makes the level much more versatile and replayable. Avoiding backtracking. Backtracking in ZAM is not a big issue thanks to the fast pace of the game and the respawning enemies, but still, walking through the same place many times rarely is any fun. Unless a particular design demands it, all the different areas in a level should be well connected to prevent backtracking. Providing all the necessary items to the player. For example, if a level requires intensive use of the bazooka or keys, there should be enough of these items lying around to make the level beatable, and the level can be harder or easier depending on the amount of items available. Choosing proper level titles. Now, this is very subjective, but for me proper titles are titles that resemble B-movie titles, like they did on the original Zombicide My Neighbors. I also try to choose titles that let the players know what the level is about. Avoiding cutoff. Cutoff is when tiles don't connect properly, and it looks terrible. Some of the tilesets make cutoff very hard to avoid, but it still should be prevented whenever possible. I've gone as far as restructuring whole levels just to remove a tiny bit of cutoff. Piranhaplant's editor helps a lot with this issue thanks to the Tile Suggest tool, but I had to be very careful when I use tilesets in a creative way. Informing players about important changes. Whenever I made a big change or added new content, I let the players know about it. Otherwise, the players may not know what to do when they find this new content. I provided this information in-game whenever possible, but some of it had to go into the README file. Design traps to avoid. Artificially extending the duration of a level. Sometimes I had ideas that I liked for a level, but these ideas weren't very versatile. I realized that if I used these ideas on large levels, I would have to make layouts that twist, turn, and bend over themselves just so I could fill up all this space. This would have made the level very boring and repetitive, like level 16 in the original game. Instead, I avoided this kind of layouts and used the less versatile ideas on smaller levels. Exhausting tilesets. ZAM has a total of 5 tilesets, and some of them have more tile variety than others. However, having a lot of tile variety doesn't mean that I should use all of those tiles in a single level. This quickly depletes possible designs for the tileset and makes all the levels look alike. Instead, I distributed the use of the tiles in the tileset so I could make more levels with a unique identity. Keeping the difficulty high. I often felt tempted to make overly hard or cruel levels, because the hack was aimed to experienced players. I took care of not doing this often because I knew that a constant high level of difficulty would tire out the players and make the hack unfun. Instead, I followed the difficulty curve I had planned and only made the levels as hard as they needed to be. Fixing what is not broken. I refrained from changing things in the original game whenever I didn't have a good reason to make those changes. The original game works pretty well, and I thought that making unnecessary changes would only add clutter to the hack. I found this to be especially true when editing sprites. Getting too attached to my ideas. Sometimes I had an idea that I really liked, but I found no way of implementing it in a fun or fair way. Sometimes I just ran into technical limitations that made the idea impossible to implement. If an idea wasn't working, I tried to realize this fact as soon as possible and try to improve it, save it for later, or scrap it altogether. Abusing skull keys. Skull keys can be very useful tools for locking secrets and pacing levels, but they are also really easy to misuse. Whenever I placed skull keys or skull doors in a level, I made sure that they were there to improve the level and not ruin it. Hiding items behind walls and trees. I realized very soon how terrible this practice is. It doesn't let the players know what they are picking up and forces them to memorize their inventory. This is extremely frustrating, and I did it sparingly, and even then, most of the time, I only hide items that fly off the screen, or I give the players a clue to look behind trees. Of course, I made exceptions in the rules when I wanted to achieve a specific result on a level, but otherwise I followed my own rules as well as I could. With all of this in mind, the actual level design process went like this. I picked an idea for the level, and also its theme, which monsters would appear, and how difficult would it be. Often I would have decided all of this way before starting building the level. I built a general layout for the level, delimiting the different areas that I wanted the level to have. At this stage, I also tried to take into account where would I place the monsters, items, and neighbors if I could. I filled in the areas and added details and relevant decoration to them. I adjusted the areas if I had to. I added the monsters. Again, I adjusted anything that needed to be adjusted. I added the items. I tested the level in depth, trying different playstyles and under several conditions. I checked that everything was correct and worked properly. I refined the level and tested it again until I was satisfied with the result. Chromister was very familiar with this level building process.
Now this is where I usually come in. Droter would message me with screenshots of the early stages of level, and we would go back and forth with feedback, more screenshots, discussions, and so on. Comments usually were on the general layout and the different sections of the level, pointing out flaws and possible improvements. Sometimes I would ask about the purpose of specific parts and gave him advice and suggestions on how to improve the flow of the levels and their appearance. Feedback was also in the form of impressions on the custom palettes and sprites, and even a short beta test of the first levels. I think we improved some levels one way or another, thanks to all this.
Now that I have explained my guidelines for level design, let's see how it all comes together to make a level. I'll quickly break down some levels so you can see how they were designed. This is level 1. The theme for this level is Residential Zone, and it's a Half-Life level. Since it's the first level, the neighbors are mostly safe and there are just a few zombies roaming around. The level is divided into 5 different areas: the park, the football field, the house, the swimming pool, and the crossroad. The players start in the park, an area that is the size of the camera bounds. They are completely walled off and there's a single exit, so it's very clear where they have to go. There's a dog and an advice scroll in there, both of which are very hard to miss. Once the players exit the park, they have the option of moving left or right. If they move right, they'll reach the level edge. They can't continue that way, but they get a square gun as compensation. They can also get some information, because if they move to grab the pickup, the camera will scroll up, revealing a cheerleader, and prompting the players to move left to rescue her. The level opens up when the players reach the crossroad. This area is the largest in the level, and serves as the hub that connects everything together. The players can go wherever they want. Zombies are more abundant here, and there are some rewards lying around for players that explore the level. The dollar bill in particular. It's behind a tree inside a small enclosure with a single entrance. Very enticing. All the decoration matches the theme of the level. There are trees, street lamps, a huge road and some water. There are some fungi that foreshadow the theme of the next level, and there's a trampoline that lets the player jump inside the house. Notice how I placed a key inside the house. That key is there because the players can use the trampoline to jump inside the house, and if they do it without a key in their inventory, they won't be able to leave. This is level 16. The theme for this level is dungeon, and it's mostly a linear level. Lots of zombies and many werewolves populate this level, and there's a Frankenstein's monster at the end. The level is divided into 4 different areas: the entrance, the branch, the spikes field, and the lab. The players start on a narrow hallway and they can immediately see an advice scroll that tells them how many tourist couples are in the level. This layout is very easy to navigate, so it's easy to find the tourist couples. The only possibility of messing up big time is to miss the branch and continue through the spikes field, which will force the players to backtrack. Since there's a chance to make the players backtrack, each area must stand out to help the players know where have they been already. The entrance and the branch are quite similar. Both feature bones on the ground, zombies, stairs, a few spikes, chasms, and tall walls. However, the entrance is a mix of chasms and walls, while the branch is mostly tall walls, has a very characteristic circular design, and it houses a werewolf. The spikes field is mostly chasms and the walls are shorter. Half of the enemies in here are zombies and the other half are werewolves. And the lab has a different flooring, it's much more decorated and only features werewolves and the mini-boss. Notice how the amount of werewolves increases gradually, from no werewolves at the beginning to only werewolves at the end. This is level 26. This level features a kinda gothic theme. It's a destroyed small village built on top of an abyss. Ants are abundant here, and there's a snakeoid too. The layout is hybrid. It features a maze-like area, a small arena, and a couple of branches. The level is divided into 4 different areas: the maze, the mine, the abyss, and the ravine. The players start on a narrow passageway that leads directly to the maze. The ants are there to harass the players while they try to reach the victims, but they don't spawn too quickly. This lets the player focus on navigating the strange terrain. A snakeoid spawns shortly after reaching the middle area, but it doesn't have enough space to attack often. The players need to reach the abyss to kill the snakeoid, and then they can open up the mine and go back to the ravine and rescue the remaining neighbors. This level isn't actually too hard for being level 26, but its unusual gimmick and the difficulty of the previous level make up for it. The flow of this level used to be much different in previous versions. The players started in the middle of the ravine, then they had to fight the snakeoid, and then they had to go to the mine and through the maze and backtrack a lot. This change of spawn point was made to prevent as much backtracking as possible. This is level 42. The theme for this level is Flood Park, and it's a circuit level. The only enemies present here are squidmen and werewolves. The layout can be easily divided into 2 halves, but it doesn't have actual areas. However, many elements like the roads, the trees, the walls, and the holes in the ground are placed carefully so they can be used as landmarks. The players start on a small island and are immediately warned about the numbers of tourist couples they have to save. The squidmen are ruthless and will attack both the players and the neighbors until the night arrives, and at that point the werewolves will join the squidmen on their onslaught. The constant harassment and the time limit make this level one of the hardest in the game, but it can be completed fairly quickly. The terrain design in this level is very hard to explain because it's made around the jumping mechanic of the werewolves. The central wall is there to prevent players from wandering around, but they can move from one side to the other at any time. The rest of the walls, the shores, and many decorative elements are placed carefully to let the werewolves jump anywhere and ambush the players when they try to get out of the water. Despite all the planning and testing, levels did change a lot during their development stage. Most levels evolve gradually, but other levels used to look much more different than they look now. A few levels even got discarded or got completely reworked as the result of the intense process of testing. I would like to show you this gradual evolution, but I think that that's beyond the scope of this video. However, if you are interested, you can find an image gallery with all the beta layouts in the video description. Creating Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the sequel, involved a tremendous amount of work for everyone involved, but I must say that I enjoyed every second of it. I would change a few things in the hack if I could, but overall I'm very happy with the final result and I'm really glad to see that people are enjoying our work. If you are a Zombies Ate My Neighbors lover like us, don't hesitate to download Piranhaplant's level editor and try to make a couple of levels. I'm sure you'll have a blast.
I hope you like this inside look of Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the sequel. It is the product of many hours of dedicated work and passion. If you still haven't played it, please give it a go.
I really like the inclusion of Dr. Tongue's skull that gives you advice while you're playing, which is I thought was a nice touch. And yeah, other than that, I think the levels are just they're challenging, but they're fair, nice and balanced. Pretty close to the original in terms of difficulty and learning curve. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this hack as much as I do.
Anyway, it was really fun playing through this hack and working to make it better, and Droter and the rest of the team did an amazing job.
We've reached the end of this video, and before I go, I want to thank Chromister, Jon Groobz, Piranhaplant and Joseph K for participating in the video and for contributing so much to the sequel. I hope you found this developer commentary entertaining, and that you have learned a thing or two about the process of making a hack. By the way, if you wish to contact me, you can reach me through my email, droterhumor@gmail.com. Thank you very much for watching and goodbye.